Let's just take a brief walk through the village. This is Washington Square Park North. And we're headed west. Up to McDougal Street. That's Washington Square Park over there. The northwest corner of it that I showed in a previous video. It's where I usually dock a city bike when I'm here. Outdoor dining area. It's getting cooler now, so we'll have to see how outdoor dining does. Whether there's going to be a drop-off. But they are allowing restaurants to have patrons like a quarter or a third capacity. And I think that can be an approximate thing because it's a tough thing to measure. I don't know, but I think restaurants are on the honor system as far as that's concerned. Every building's an interesting building in the village. There's a book I read recently called Greenwich Village Stories, and it has little stories by various fairly famous and really famous people who have lived in the village, and a lot of good stories in that book. I might try to do a future video on some of the locations that they talk about in that book. One of the stories that comes to mind, this is 6th Avenue, looking down 6th Avenue to the south, World Trade Center, straight down. So one of the stories that comes to mind, we had a better view of it a little further back. Petland's gone out of business. And that's a very popular chain. That's surprising to see one of them go out of business. This restaurant's gone out of business. It's for rent. It is one thing, you'll see a lot of restaurants that do have outdoor dining, but you do see more store spaces that are vacant now. Like there's a store for rent sign across the street. Particularly the independent stores. And what I was starting to talk about before was this is the Jefferson Market Library. And we're crossing Greenwich Avenue, which has some great fun restaurants up the street. One of them I really like is called Tea and Sympathy. It's a very small British restaurant. I guess it's full service, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But given its small size, it has a very short menu, but it's fun. I've met the owners. They, like me, wanted to have a British phone box out on the sidewalk, and they were having a tough time getting approval from the city. They still don't have a British phone box in front of their restaurant. I talked to them about this more than 10 years ago. I have a British phone box that I built in front of our house. But anyway, on this location of this triangular piece of land, one of the stories from the Greenwich Village Stories book is that there used to be a women's prison. So it's all been knocked down and it's a garden space now. When I worked for the city of New York, I worked for the mayor's budget office, and my job was to oversee the budgets of the public library systems. There are 3 in New York. So I thought it'd be interesting to come and spend a day at a branch library to see what people do, you know, behind the scenes of librarians. And this says it used to be a courthouse, Jefferson Market Courthouse, designed by Vaux and Withers, Calvert Vaux, famous architect. Constructed in 1876, served as the women's court until 1932. So I guess that explains why there was a prison right next to this. But now it's a library. It's a beautiful building inside. You can imagine it's such an interesting building on the outside. Anyway, there was nothing you would not know or imagine about librarians. It's pretty cut and dried. I'm not saying that has anything to do with their personal lives. I guess this is getting some reconstruction. There's some old foundation work. All right, what street did I just put myself on? West 10th. Rosemary's. It's nice. This time of year when it hasn't rained much and it's been really pleasant weather. And let's walk up Greenwich. And it's nice in the sun, but sometimes when you're in the shade, it's starting to get cool. Maybe I'll walk up to where that Tea and Sympathy restaurant is that I was talking about. There's a French restaurant. That's one thing about Manhattan. There are a ton of French restaurants. We might even have more French restaurants in Paris. And it doesn't mean that they're expensive. They're like bistros, most of them. So it's reasonable. Looking down Charles Street. So Greenwich is one of the more commercial streets. Bleecker is another one. I was just in Washington Square Park and it was packed. I didn't film it because I filmed it before, but this time there were a fair amount of drugged out people, unfortunately. Not the majority, but a decent small percentage. Indian restaurant. Whatever this was is out of business. They made meatballs. This store is vacant. There's Elephant and Castle. I think this is an outpost from London. We're walking towards 7th Avenue. Here, I'll pick up the pace so we can cross here. Hopefully. Ooh, long line of cars. Up 7th Avenue towards Midtown. What street is this? Do not see a sign. West 11th? I think West 11th. Another vacant space. So, I mean, in New York, when you come, you might not have a million choices of restaurants and shops to go to, but you've still got 900,000. It smells good. It's like a scent store. This place is vacant. Paella, Spanish place. This place might have been vacant before the pandemic. This building looks like it has round windows. It's a hospital, Lenox Hill Hospital. It's their downtown location. Lenox Hill's on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. There was a really good Netflix show about typical goings-on at Lenox Hill, focusing on their neurology, brain surgery division up on the Upper East Side, but also the emergency room down here. And I highly recommend it. It was very good. It's like quintessential New York at its best. Really amazing people that work in New York's hospitals. All right, so I think this is the block that I'm looking for. would be a sign of the times if this restaurant is not still here. Although I do see a Union Jack flag flying up there, so that's a good sign. And it's one restaurant that was so small originally that now that it has outdoor dining, I think it's actually got more space than it did before. Yeah, it says Tea and Sympathy. So we're between 7th and 8th Avenues on Greenwich Avenue. Tea and Sympathy. And there's another fish and chips place right next door. So this is sort of the de facto British part of Manhattan. Let's take another look back. So I'll just walk up to 8th Avenue and end this quickie video. I was introduced to that restaurant, Tea and Sympathy, by a friend of mine who's a real Anglophile, an American. But then I once took a visiting friend from England to it, and she said, yep, this passes muster, this is the real deal. So that was good to hear. All right, Greenwich Avenue ends here at 8th Avenue on a beautiful day in the first week of October 2020 as the pandemic just grinds on and on with no end in sight. But hopefully that second wave will not come around. And looking at Midtown and looking downtown. All right, thanks for joining me.